This is a 20gatestorms.com and Hurricane Tracker app tropical weather update, including Hurricane Jova, on this Tuesday evening, October 11th. As of the 2 p.m. Pacific Time official advisory from the National Hurricane Center, Jova has weakened down to a Category 2 hurricane, which is certainly some good news. However, it is still packing maximum sustained winds of 100 miles per hour, so we could still witness some fairly significant winds, especially right where the center crosses the coast. But what could be perhaps the greatest threat from this system is the risk of mudslides and flooding with regard to that heavy rainfall that will be across much of the higher terrain over the next 48 hours, as this will be a somewhat slow-moving system once it moves inland. One good indication that this will be a slow-moving system over the next 2 to 3 days is the latest spaghetti model plot. As you can see, once the storm gains a little bit more latitude, it is more than likely going to lose its main steering mechanisms and just meander around much of the Mexican coastline as it significantly weakens. The one constant throughout Hurricane Jova's life cycle is that Jova has been a smaller sized hurricane than most, and that is fairly good news because the hurricane force winds still only extend about 15 miles outward from the eye, and so therefore many communities will not be directly impacted by the hurricane force winds. In fact, since the track has shifted a little bit more toward the west, it is looking increasingly likely that Manzanillo, Mexico, will feel no more than tropical storm force winds and some heavy rainfall with the risk of flooding. But in terms of the actual hurricane force conditions, it looks as though some of the smaller communities between Manzanillo and Puerto Vallarta have the biggest shot at receiving those, and one of those in particular is La Manzanilla. The afternoon satellite presentation has certainly declined compared to yesterday. We no longer see a highly apparent eye-like feature within the central dense overcast, but we can still see that the center is located within some of the strongest convection. In fact, it looks as though as we move into the evening hours, we are experiencing yet another convective burst right near the center. So if the storm is not intensifying, it is certainly maintaining its intensity fairly well. So a Category 2 landfall appears to be the most likely scenario, and that is despite some of the increasing southwest shear that we have been noting on the water vapor within the last 12 hours, and that is the main culprit behind some of the recent weakening that has occurred with Hurricane Jova. Before moving on to discussing other topics in the tropics this evening, I just want to show the local terrain map for much of southern and western Mexico, and this is why we are most concerned about the risk of flooding and mudslides. We see several peaks in excess of about 2,000 meters here across much of the southwest corner of the country, especially to the south and west of Guadalajara, which is where the main flood risk is located. And of course, we are still dealing with a second system in the eastern Pacific. This is the latest forecast for Tropical Storm Irwin. Irwin is moving off toward the east at 8 miles per hour. It is still a minimal tropical storm with 45 mile per hour sustained winds. It looks as though the upper level conditions will not be conducive for this system to intensify. And the latest low to mid-level steering would also suggest that this system has a lessening chance of directly making landfall across Mexico. Instead, it is more than likely going to remain to the south and slowly weaken down to a tropical depression. This latest thinking is also in general agreement with the latest spaghetti model plot consensus. Switching over to the latest Northern Hemisphere enhanced infrared imagery, we can see both of our systems in the eastern Pacific. This is Hurricane Jova, and then more toward the southwest, this is Tropical Storm Irwin. And on the water vapor, you can see why we're not expecting much from Irwin. We see that there is a mid to upper level trough diving down from the south. Along with it, we have much more stable and dry air beginning to impinge on our tropical cyclone, which is not going to be conducive for any strengthening, and it doesn't look like conditions are going to get much better in the extended range for that storm. And this is the same trough that is pushing Jova to the northeast, but the problem is that this trough is eventually going to become elongated from east to west, so the steering currents will break down, and Jova will do nothing more than just rain itself out over the higher terrain over the next 72 hours. In the meantime, the rest of the tropics are looking fairly quiet. We see nothing but unfavorable conditions across much of the Atlantic basin, but we are still going to have to focus our attention close to Central America over the next 3 to 7 days. The good news is that the models are beginning to center the area of low pressure more so over land compared to open waters, which is going to limit the possibility for tropical development. This is the latest 12Z European forecast, and by day 5 it's still trying to split off a broad low to the east of the Yucatan Peninsula, but overall it's still centered mainly over Central America as we go in throughout the period. and by day 7 we do have a broad low over the south central Gulf, but we no longer have a surface high just to the north, so this is no longer the perfect environment that we had been seeing in the models in some of the more recent cycles, and so therefore the low begins to weaken as we go into day 8, while the rest of the Atlantic Basin is quiet. So the only significant player in the tropics this evening is Hurricane Jova, so all eyes are focused on the Mexican coastline. Hopefully everyone in the local area has prepared well in advance of this storm, and that will greatly diminish the risk posed by this system. And now is the time to hunker down, as the weather will begin to go downhill quite a bit over the next 6 hours, and we wish you the best here at 28storms.com. So thanks again for using us as a resource, and we will have more updates continuing throughout the remainder of the week.